guest today is ASHS member Dr. Chad Miller from Colorado State University. He's an associate professor who has a multidisciplinary research program related to landscape and greenhouse plant production. We chose to interview him because he's one of the ASHS's 2024 Career Award winners, meaning he was recognized for his outstanding contributions in his field. We also wanted to talk with Chad because he writes many papers and hosts conference workshops and frequently speaks on how we can be better teachers for horticulture students. Let's give this interview a listen. Good morning, Dr. Miller. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks. Glad to be here. This is exciting.
For our listeners, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Dr. Chad Miller. I'm an associate professor at Colorado State University.
What do you do there?
Lots of things, depending on the day, right? So I have a three-way appointment, if we think academically. I have a research, teaching, and extension appointment, basically about even across the board. And so not only do I teach research and extension, but embedded in that is the director of the trial garden. So CSU has a pretty large, prominent trial garden, and I'm the director of that as well. So
the reason we reached out to you is because the ASHS has a very robust awards program that recognizes the best publications in our journals in multiple disciplines. And recently you received an award for the Outstanding Education Journal publication from the ASHS. So we're really excited to read this paper. And do you think you could describe what it was about?
Yes, sure, Sam. So yes, I was pleasantly surprised, honestly, to have received that. So it's a great honor to be recognized with, I know others who have won it, and to be able to be recognized on their level. So the paper was related to some work that I had done at K-State, and it's transferring over here to Colorado State. So as I had mentioned, I teach ID courses, and I work on, additional skills in the classroom besides just plant identification skills, but some of the soft skills, if you will, like, making presentations and conversational skills and critical thinking, of course. And so the paper focuses on developing student trade shows, right? And so I had several ideas that kind of came together. So where's the trade show part fit in? Well, I remember going to like Cultivate or other trade shows, and as a student, you'd be walking around, you're trying to absorb information. And I always felt sort of awkward because they'll see your name badge and it says student. So I'm not necessarily their customer. I'm not going to be giving them money. So I found it awkward, and I'm pretty personable, I think. I found it awkward to like enter in a conversation with somebody at a trade show and then like try to leave the conversation. So I was like, that always kind of made a challenge for me. So that's the trade show side. And I was like, we're doing these presentations in class. Like, I always like students. So I obviously pick the plants in the class, but I want students to also engage. And so there might be a plant that they are really interested in and would like to share with the class. And so one of the first couple of semesters that I was teaching, it was Hort 375, Landscape Plants 2. We did a very typical, like, all right, I want you to pick your genus. I opened it pretty wide. Pick a genus. It didn't have to be a specific, genus specific epithet, very narrow. I said, pick a genus. And it didn't have to necessarily be, one that would grow in Kansas. I really just wanted people to be appreciative of plants. So they picked this genus, and they would do a very typical, like, paper on it. And then they would give a stand-up presentation in front of the class, like a 10, 12 minute with 3 minutes of question, very similar to, a professional sort of talk. Well, in a class of about 48 or 50, that gets to be a lot of presentations. And in one class period, if you're lucky, you get through 6 or 7 if you have a lot of questions. And so that carried on for almost 3 weeks, and that gets to be burdensome. So I got brainstorming. I was like, well, what if we like combine the trade show sort of a thing? And I had I had a good TA at the time, and we brainstormed it. And the idea was, well, they could still pick their genus, but let's work on some of these other skills of like entering into conversation and making, time management, making sure you get around the room. So we could actually do in one class period, like 8 or 10 students, and they get creative. I usually have creativity as a major component to all my courses. I want people to really use their creativity, whatever that means to them. And so we still got, they still picked the genus and they still did the report on it, but then they had to create like a trade show display and try to quote unquote sell their product, which is selling it was just talking about their product to their colleagues that would, meander around the classroom and look at their posters or their booth, if you will. And I always tried to encourage them I would help them get plants if they needed, displays, or, I had students that would create like cake pops for allium, right? They'd dress them up and look like allium. So that was kind of the thinking behind it. Was like, all right, so we could work on some of these soft skills. We could work on still presenting information, but in a whole different, not the typical in front of the classroom, after the first group of them are over, people are now bored with it. So, so we implemented it, and it was very well received. And so that's where we decided to take data and student perceptions on it. Did they like this kind of format? Did they feel like they still learned as much as they would with a traditional sort of presentation? So we implemented that several years, and depending on the year, if we could get another, I had other faculty walk by the classroom from other departments and go, "What's going on in here?" And they would just stop and look around, and I would invite in other faculty or classes, and they could experience the student presentations as well. So that's kind of the gist of the paper. And man, there were some students that just got all creative, like built small fences, just like you would think in a trade show, right? Like they built a really cool display, and then of course there were others that it was a simple poster board, and that's fine. But they were graded. Actually, a smaller portion of their grade was on creativity. Some of them would just do a straight up poster board display, and if it wasn't colorful and as creative, they just didn't get the highest score. But it wouldn't ever break their grade per se. I didn't want that to be the major factor. I wanted them to learn about plants, quite frankly. So
it's a very intriguing teaching technique and learning technique. So, commonly I think in horticulture and a lot of our technical and science disciplines, we're very driven by the content. You have to know the content. You have to know the plants. But it seems that you have introduced some other really important learning objectives and learning outcomes. So again, if you had to kind of describe that, how would you prioritize the learning outcomes or the learning objectives that you have for this particular exercise? Obviously, content, knowing the plants, you said is part of it, but you've given some of the other criteria. And then I have a follow-up question as well.
Yes. So I would say a couple of the other learning outcomes from this. So as the presenter, they would do professionalism, right? They would have to look professional. They'd have to be able to talk to their audience. In this whole time, I was going around assessing them on their presentation skills. So it paralleled very similar to the typical, in front of the classroom. A second outcome was peer review, right? So we do it sometimes when students are sitting there just observing up front, but every student actually had to go around to every booth and evaluate their colleagues. And then I would collect those, and the colleagues would see them anonymously, what their colleagues were saying. So in that terms, evaluation, self-evaluation, but also responding to others' evaluation was part of the learning outcome here. And then the creativity side of it. So there were several factors that came out of this that were not necessarily a typical just straight run classroom sort of approach to it.
It sounds very multidimensional, which I think is probably what distinguishes you as a faculty member and a quality professor, teaching instructor, that you you're not just driving in. You need to know 210 Latin names,
Right.
but these other skills that actually are going to make your students employable and functional professionals.
Yes. The thing I would add to that, and so several of the things that I've published or done like scholarship of teaching and learning on, again, having the heavy concentration on identification courses, have always, many of you have probably had them, right? And you just mentioned, knowing Latin and spelling for a couple hundred plants. It can get very monotonous very quickly in the course, and it becomes sort of that almost. Well, not almost, for many becomes a rote memorization. It moves from learning to memorization, and we lose some of that ability in there. And so it's taken me a while, actually. I've moved away from quantity to more of the quality. And I might hear from some of our listeners about this, but I will certainly enter in the conversation about it. I'd rather have students know only 50, 60, 70 plants out of a semester, but actually learn and be able to use other learning techniques, the creativity, than amassing a number of plants and moving to that more memorization side. And so that coupled with making the class more interesting, right? Because you can easily get towards the middle of the semester, and as you keep learning this, it becomes very cyclical. And so I was always looking for those other ways to implement projects or other learning styles that we're still learning about plants or learning about morphology or families or whatever it might be, but also not doing the same thing over. And I might inject here, I like having fun in the classroom, actually. And I think all too often we lose sight of having a more relaxed, fun atmosphere, which I think helps with that, with an ID course, especially as we really get into the trenches of the semester.
Yeah, I agree with that. My own philosophy is that if learning is not enjoyable, then it's force feeding. It really does need to be enjoyable. Let me have one more follow-up question, Samson, and I'll let you. I can see you have got some questions too. So you mentioned that you have peer review. The students are actually evaluating themselves. I assume you give them some kind of a rubric. How do they deal with that? I think in my experience, peer evaluation is something students they're a little intimidated about. How do you approach it so that it becomes meaningful for both the evaluator as well as the student that's being evaluated?
Yep. No, that's a great question, Kurt. It can be awkward, and it can be challenging, and it can be frustrating. It can be enjoyable, all the feelings. And I think for me, as I found my way through the activity, doing it a few times, yes, we gave a rubric. It was a basic, 1 through 5 sort of rating system of what is poor versus what is really good. And so before we even entered into the actual trade shows, commencing, we did go through the rubric. I shared the slips that they would all be evaluating on, and tried to give them ideas of what a 0 means, or 0 or 1 or a 5 means, and the why. And I approach this the same way as I do teaching evaluations with students. In some level of constructive criticism, constructive feedback is going to be extremely helpful for not only the party you're giving it to, but for yourself throughout the rest of your life, right? Whether it's in your job, at home, or whatever you're doing. It's fine to have a thoughtful opinion. And if you didn't like it, why didn't you like it? Or what was it about it that was so good, right? Give us some of the nuts and bolts, the whys and the hows, or what it was. Just don't say it was really bad or was really good. That doesn't help the presenter. It doesn't help you, and help them to think through that when they're grading it, or when they're looking at that trade show booth, what is it that helps you learn at that booth, kind of a thing, right? So, and I think it's one of those things that just students don't get that much experience with. So when they do have to do this critiquing and criticism of others, it's hard for them to do sometimes. And I think sometimes you just have to put the give them the rails and tell them it's okay to, pick something apart, but be constructive about it. Give the person that will see your information a reason and an ability to get better, or an ability or a reason to pat themselves on the back why they did a good job, kind of a thing. And I think more often than not, students really rose to the occasion and actually did provide thoughtful comments on there.
And they learn to hear and accept criticism too. And they know that it's constructive criticism because you've made such a space for it.
Yes, I think, and that's exactly right, Samson. As I start the classes, and I've, of course, early on in my career, this was probably, chipping my teeth at it and sort of a challenge. But now, every time I start class in the semester, I try to set the space, what the space looks like in my classroom, in my lab. And students who ever have a class, previous semester, and then they see some of the same beginning slides in the semester. But I always put up a slide that says, I don't know, like IDK. And I always have a big symbol of wrong written on a slide, because I let the students know I will actually be pretty straightforward and say, no, that's a wrong answer, straight out of my mouth. And or if they ask me a question and I really don't know, I will say, I don't know, but based on, thinking about this. So I really try to create the culture, create the space that we are in a learning environment. And if they already knew it, they probably wouldn't be sitting in my class to begin with. And if I already knew it, I might have a bigger, better paying job. I don't know. But I try to create that space that we're here to learn, and it's okay to have that ability to constructively criticize, and also receive it.
This is so cool to hear you talk about scholarship of teaching and learning and your philosophy of it. I've had several really amazing professors over the years, and they're incredible, but I don't think it's super common, as far as I've seen, for amazing professors to be publishing on what they're doing right. And so I'm curious, what motivated you to write a paper about this technique and the other amazing ways that you teach?
That's a great question. If you want the straight answer, I was on an 80% teaching appointment on a promotion and tenure track at a land-grant institution, right? And so publishing is an important part. And I had a really good mentor there at Kansas State as well, and viewers might know Dr. Kim Williams at Kansas State. And so she was a great colleague and mentor, still a mentor for me. And she had done a lot of work in the scholarship of teaching and learning space. And I had several other colleagues at K-State as well that were great in the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so I landed in a culture that respected, appreciated, expected scholarship of teaching and learning, not only in our department, but also at the college level. Our Associate Dean of Teaching, Don Boggs, was very supportive of it, but also was demanding in the sense of when you went through your promotion and tenure process, if you had a very significant teaching appointment, there was a need for a demonstrable scholarship of teaching and learning, or at the very least, some level of scholarly teaching. And so I landed in a culture that was the culture. And so I, again, kind of going back to the previous, childhood story, knowing I was a teacher, I embraced it. And I would actually say, as I was progressing through my graduate degree program, I also knew that I might land in a faculty position that has some teaching responsibility. And so I put an education faculty on my committee, going through my PhD, which is not typical. Oftentimes it's very disciplinary oriented, but I personally thought if I'm going to have some expectation of teaching in the future, whatever that was, 20, 30, or 80%, then it might be helpful to have some nuts and bolts of teaching. And I did. I took 3 basic courses in grad school. One was curriculum development, one was teaching science, and then I'm drawing a blank on the third one. But I felt that I should at least try to prepare myself for being successful in the position. And then I landed at K-State with very supportive programs, people, expectations, the culture. So,
you have approached not only your horticulture discipline as a science, you've approached the scholarship of teaching as a science. So in this particular paper, in other papers that you've had, when I read it, it wasn't a one-off. So how many years did you do this to see how it worked? You refined it. And can you give us from the paper what the data told us? What data did you collect? And what are the take-home messages? I'm an educator. Chad, I need to know this because I want to improve my teaching. So tell me what I need to know, what worked. And if something didn't work, I know you didn't publish that, but you can tell me that too.
Yes. No, that's a great question, Kurt. So yes, many of the things I've published, I've tried to do more than, publish data on more than one semester or one offering of the course, with the idea that in the background at some level repetitions would be helpful to really try to draw some conclusions on certain activities. And I'd say more broadly speaking, for the scholarship of teaching and learning, I'm still learning about this. I'm still learning about, learning itself and understanding my methods and my approaches in the classroom with activities. And so in particular with the trade show publication, a couple of things that are kind of consistent through all the publications. I look at perception from students because that's a big part of implementing a project is, do students really react to this in the positive sense? If they're really not reacting to it positively, it's probably not going to be at least leading us down the road of potentially learning. And so that's usually perception in the activities or the implementation of any project. And so with the trade publication, there was a lot of satisfaction from the students. It was comments where like, it's a change of pace. It's more relaxed rather than the pressures of being up front of, your colleagues in a very formal presentation style, which they get more often than not that experience through other courses. And so the perception of the activity was very positive through all this. And then if you toss in students getting really creative and bringing in cake pops or, cupcakes that look like Venus flytrap or whatever it might be, that just really adds to it. Anytime you add food to the mix, right? Like that just makes class appropriate. And so the actual learning, so then we start looking at like pre and post. I usually typically will do a pre-activity assessment if they, on a specific part of the knowledge of certain group of plants or whatever it might be, and then try to do the post-activity to see if their perception is increased or they're learning what they perceive as their learning. So there's been a few projects where it hasn't really looked at specific grade improvement per se, but perception of learning through that as well. And so that as I grow in the space, those are things that I'm looking to do better with, of looking at the actual grade assessment and see if we see improvements with that.
That is so cool. I really, it's really interesting to hear you talk about all the ways that you're trying to understand student learning from a deeper perspective. Mm-hmm. You must have faced a lot of challenges on the way. Do any come to mind?
Yes, just learning the whole space myself, because we do a lot of things that we just like obviously observe other faculty, how they teach, or, mentors going through college and such, just observing. And now as I, developed into a teacher and into that space, looking back and seeing how faculty and, for example, Dr. Ferris taught a course, it makes a little more sense, right? But moving into it on my own side of like, how do you implement it? And on the implementation side, basic basic challenge was getting IRB down, right? The whole institutional review board process, and that alone can be a challenge. And I'll speak especially on my firsthand example of, I will be thinking of something on the way in today, right? And be like, oh my gosh, that'd be amazing to do this activity on Thursday, right? And I have 2 days to like implement it because I can't wait until next semester to do it, right? But then it's like, oh, I need IRB approval if I'm going to really start collecting certain pieces of data or how I'm going to present it. So there's been times I'm like, Chad, write that idea down and maybe implement it, chip your teeth on it. So I have a better understanding for submitting my IRB, like I can refine it. So I'd say that's one of the challenges I learned early on, is the whole planning process in academics. And you're not only planning for is my class on the line item or, line schedule for next fall next fall already. And what times and what labs, right? We're operating 6 to 8 to 9 months out, but even doing that with my courses and adding scholarship of teaching and learning is like, oh, IRB. And it's not the quickest, simplest process, especially if there's one thing that they have a question about, and it goes back and forth. And so long story short, the IRB has been one of those, like, early on, if it wasn't in my radar immediately, it was like, oh man, I gotta wait on that. Other challenges is just figuring out how to do the science side of it, like the actual evaluation of it and methods and materials, or more the methods, of how to do it and how to really like extract, are they learning or are they not learning? And that's still an ongoing thing for me.
You're talking about student learning in your career. Have you seen changes in students and how they're learning and how we have to adapt teaching techniques to that? Has it changed much during your career with students' behavior and learning styles in the classroom?
Yes. How long does this podcast go for? No, just kidding.
I'm going to give you 2 minutes.
2 minutes. I would say even in my short tenure, I have seen some level of change. And I chat with my colleagues back at K-State and here as well to see if that's somewhat level of a normal. But I think especially since COVID time, and we're still figuring out at some level what this new learning is here. And I try to parse it out because I switched from K-State to Colorado State just after the pandemic. So part of it for me is learning the new culture of students that I have here at Colorado State versus the culture of students at K-State. But I would say over my time, this shift to a more interest or dependence of online opportunity. And that's really a space I wasn't, that wasn't me coming through college and wasn't me early in my teaching. I really appreciate the face-to-face, the interaction, and get to see them on a almost daily basis. And so after COVID and the last few years, for sure, just the challenge of what group wants it to be online and what group doesn't want it to be online, and then the part in between. Or sometimes it almost feels like when it's convenient, they'll be there in person, but then it's not. But I also try to take a step back and realize the students that we currently have in our programs, it's not the same as it was even when I was an undergraduate. For example, I've had many cases that, like at K-State, I was an academic advisor at the same time. So I would advise upwards of 30 to 40 students in a semester, 40 on the high end. But to learn, have a conversation like, so yeah, I'm working a part-time job. And I'll be like, so how many hours is your part-time? And some of them were approaching 30 hours. And I'm going, that's a bit beyond a part-time job when they're trying to balance 30 hours of work plus, 15 credit hours in a semester, and if they're struggling in a class. So I try to step back and understand where our students are at right now in paying for college, raising families, all the above. Not that it didn't happen before, But my perception is we have a large contingent of students that are working simultaneously, have a lot of irons in the fire. And so how do I make the classroom or the class experience the best, right? And they can still learn, but also I can appreciate that life is happening, right? Like life happens at the same time.
It's really cool to hear you talk about this, and like I can sense how important and how meaningful this is to you, and that it feels like you really know the weight that is on your shoulders with these students, like shaping their lives around the advice you give them and the teaching they receive from you.
Thanks. I mean, when I go into a classroom, I do tell students, I realize I would love for my class to be the most important thing in your life. And I recognize that it's not the most important thing for most things every day. But I do have passion in my course. And then when you're here and in this time space, like I would like you to devote it to that kind of a thing, but also really respect that life is going to happen. When you have to make that choice to go skiing, that's fine. Those are going to be choices you make. And I think it's just part of just being straightforward, open, honest conversation. I think not just students, I think most people just respect that, right? Like you're going to tell me you're going to miss class for skiing. I'll be like, okay, have fun, but there will be a consequence. Either you miss the quiz or you miss, the points or the content, and that's up to you, right? And I don't pass the judgment on that. That's life. You make those decisions, and that will happen for the rest of your life, right? And I truly want them to learn, and I'm truly here to help. It does make things complicated at times when life does happen and you make an exception for a student, but I feel that's more that is what we can do for them.
My last question is, in just a few words, what is most rewarding to you as being a teacher?
Seeing students and people be successful. Like it's, as people have said, you see light bulbs turn on, or like you see people make the connections of what we just talked about for the last 3 or 4 weeks, or just the last day for that matter, to see them to put that together and then to be successful, to see, former students, I've had a couple, we do here's an example. We have a kind of an in-house career fair here, and so we have, and our department is horticulture and landscape architecture, so it's a wide swath of horticulture industry here. We had a firm come in, and there was this girl that was at their table, and this was like my first year here at Colorado State, and I'm like, man, she looks really familiar, and I went and like just wasn't placing it. Long story short, I had that student at K-State. I taught a section or two for landscape architecture program when the faculty was on sabbatic. But that student was like, hey, Chad, I remember you. And it was like that whole, like I saw them being successful in a firm here in Colorado, and, several other students over time. And, whether it's a ASHS or that sort of thing. One of my colleagues was my first graduate student, Dr. Craver. And so I get to work right next to him. And so, to answer your question, is to see people be successful, to use horticulture, and if they don't use horticulture, at the very least, be a successful person. That's what's really rewarding.
Chad, this has been a delightful conversation. I feel like your students are really fortunate that you're approaching your teaching as a scholarship, as a discipline, and you're being thoughtful about that. I'm sure your students are benefiting from it, just like those of us that get to read your publications. Thanks for sharing those things. So you're teaching your students, and they benefit from it. But from those of us, the other teachers out there that are reading about things that are working, thanks for being my teacher too.
Well, I thank you, and that's what I learn from other teachers, right? Like that's the thing about when we go to like the conference, or when we have like in-house, teaching and learning opportunities. It's learning from the others, and you're like, oh my gosh, I could do part of that in my class, or that's the nugget I could try over here. Even if it's over an animal science and a nutrition course or something like that, or whatever it might be. I always find where there's an applicability, and so, yeah, I learned from you all, and it's an honor to be able to hear that I am helping others learn as well. So,
Chad, thank you for doing what you do, and thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been I really, really appreciate it, and I look forward to more interaction in ASHS and teaching and learning with everybody.
That was such a wonderful conversation. That was so much fun to hear a professor talk about his philosophy. I've had many wonderful professors, but usually they don't talk so much about the thought that goes into their class design or their philosophy for what they want to prioritize. I loved that conversation. What did you think, Kurt?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it too. As a faculty member that's been teaching for 40 years, and even when I was a student, inspired teaching inspires and motivates students. I really enjoyed what Chad was saying and the way he's thought this through, and he tries things and some of these ideas. But it's wonderful because the experiences that he's giving in the classroom probably motivates students. It encourages and empowers students. And all the time, these faculty members and professors like Chad, they're coming up with novel ideas for teaching that are being developed inside of our discipline, and they help prepare students for the real world.
Absolutely. That's a really great point. The creativity, like the fact that Dr. Miller is being creative with his classroom design, encourages his students to be creative. And I don't know, there's something about that. I don't think science is seen as like a particularly creative profession. But I really love the little parts of science that have creativity at the core of them. And that's what he's encouraging in these students. So for our listeners, to read more about this topic, you can check out Dr. Miller's paper, Classroom Trade Show, an alternative to traditional classroom presentations in an undergraduate plant identification course, which is published in Hortechnology, one of the open source peer-reviewed journals by the American Society for Horticultural Science. Chad Miller has also held many conference workshops over the years. I've been lucky enough to join a couple of them. He talks about all sorts of exciting topics in teaching, like integrating game design into study materials for students. So if you're signing up for the conference this year, keep an eye out for other awesome workshops on teaching. Links to Dr. Miller's article and to his other work will be in the show notes.
If this interview resonates with you, I recommend renewing your membership or joining the American Society for Horticulture Science, and you can be part of interest groups like the Teaching Methods Interest Group. And take a look at the section of our ASHS journal, Horticulture. We have a special section just on teaching technology. If you'd like more information about the American Society for Horticulture Science in general, go to our website, ashs.org. This is Kurt Rome and Samson Humphrey with Plants, People, Science. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you, Samson.
See you, Kurt.
The ASHS podcast, Plants, People, and Science, is made possible by member dues and volunteerism. Please go to ashs.org to learn more. If you're not already a member of the ASHS, we invite you to join. ASHS is a not-for-profit, and your donations are tax-deductible.
This episode was hosted by Samson Humphrey and Kurt Rome. Special thanks to our audio engineer, Andrew Sheldorf, our research specialists, Lena Wilson and Andrew Sheldorf, our ASHS support team, Sarah Powell and Sally Murphy, and our musician, John Clark. Thanks for listening.